Imagine watching your child walk out the front door, down the block, around the corner, out of sight. Now imagine they never come back. In Atlanta, Georgia, between 1979 and 1981, that became real life for dozens of black families. Children running errands, kids heading to a friend's house, teenagers going nowhere in particular. Gone. 9 years old, 10, 12, 13, 9 again. By the time America was paying attention, more than 20 children had already vanished. Some were found quickly, others took months. And at least one, a 10-year-old boy named Darren Glass, was never found at all. But here is the question that still doesn't have a clean answer. Was one man responsible for all of it? Or were Atlanta's families dealing with something far more complicated? Atlanta in 1979 called itself the city too busy to hate. It had just elected Maynard Jackson, its first black mayor. It was building skyscrapers, hosting conventions, positioning itself as the capital of the New South. But beneath that image, entire neighborhoods were struggling. Poverty ran deep in Atlanta's black communities. Crime rates were high, and when children in those neighborhoods started disappearing, the city was slow, agonizingly slow, to connect the dots. The first 2 victims were found in late July 1979. Edward Smith, 14, and Alfred Evans, 13, discovered together in a vacant lot. Within weeks, Milton Harvey disappeared. Then 9-year-old Yusuf Bell found strangled inside an abandoned school building. 4 children. 3 months. And Atlanta's police still hadn't formally declared a pattern. It took the children's own mothers to force the city to act. In April 1980, Camille Bell, whose son Yusuf had been murdered 6 months earlier, co-founded an organization called STOP, the Committee to Stop Children's Murders. She and other grieving mothers organized press conferences, lobbied City Hall, and demanded investigators acknowledge what every parent in those neighborhoods already knew. This was not a coincidence. Something was hunting their children. Through the spring and summer of 1980, the disappearances accelerated. Angel Lanier, 12, the first known female victim, found bound and strangled. Jeffrey Mathis, 11. Eric Middlebrooks, 15. Christopher Richardson, 12. Aaron Weich, 10. Found beneath a bridge the day after he vanished. Parents stopped letting their children walk to school. Churches organized neighborhood escorts. Block watches formed on streets that had never needed them. Fear had moved in, and it wasn't leaving. By July 1980, Atlanta police formally established a Missing and Murdered Children Task Force. Initially just 5 investigators. Then LaTonya Wilson, 7 years old, was abducted from her family's apartment. The FBI's involvement formally began. By November 1980, the U.S. Attorney General ordered a full federal commitment. By January 1981, President Reagan had sent Justice Department officials to Atlanta personally. Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. performed a benefit concert that raised $200,000 for the investigation. The Atlanta child murders had become a national crisis. The FBI assigned one of its most experienced behavioral analysts to the case. Special Agent John Douglas. Douglas and his team built a profile. Someone local, someone familiar to the neighborhoods, someone the children would willingly approach. But then, in early 1981, something changed. The victims began skewing older, teenagers and young adults, and the bodies started appearing in the Chattahoochee River rather than in vacant lots. Investigators believed this change was deliberate, and it handed them their first real tactical opening. If a killer was now disposing of bodies in the river, they were using Atlanta's bridges, and bridges could be watched. The task force quietly staked out 14 bridges along the Chattahoochee. Officers sat in unmarked vehicles through the night after night, waiting. At approximately 2:52 in the morning on May 22, 1981, officers stationed near the James Jackson Parkway Bridge heard a loud splash in the water below. Moments later, they saw a car cross the bridge, then slow, then turn around and cross back. They stopped the vehicle. The driver was a 23-year-old freelance photographer and aspiring music promoter named Wayne Bertram Williams. He was questioned. He gave an account of where he'd been and why he was out. Investigators found no probable cause to hold him. He was released. 2 days later, the body of 27-year-old Nathaniel Cater surfaced in the Chattahoochee River, downstream from the bridge where investigators had heard that splash. On June 21, 1981, Wayne Williams was arrested and charged with the murder of Nathaniel Cater. He was subsequently indicted for a second murder, Jimmy Ray Payne, 21. The prosecution's case rested heavily on forensic evidence, specifically fibers. Investigators said they had matched fibers found on multiple victims to carpeting, bedding, and clothing from Williams' home and vehicle. They said dog hairs found on victims were consistent with Williams' German Shepherd. They presented witnesses who placed Williams near some victims in the days before they disappeared, and crucially, in a move that remains controversial, the prosecution was allowed to introduce evidence related to 10 additional murders for which Williams had never been charged. The defense called it a strategy to convict their client of crimes he hadn't been charged with. The prosecution called it the truth. The trial lasted 7 weeks. After 11 hours of deliberation, on February 27, 1982, the jury found Wayne Williams guilty of 2 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. And then, 3 days later, the task force announced it was closing 21 additional cases, attributing them to Williams, not through a verdict, not through additional charges, through a press statement. For many, the conviction felt like resolution. The murders had largely stopped after Williams' arrest. Multiple fiber associations had been documented. A jury had found him guilty. But resolution and truth are not always the same thing. Wayne Williams was convicted of killing 2 adults. No jury has ever found him guilty of a single child's death. That distinction matters, legally, morally, and for the families still seeking answers. The fiber evidence, while compelling to the jury, has since drawn scrutiny from forensic experts who note that fiber matching is circumstantial by nature. In 1991, Williams' appellate team surfaced allegations that the Georgia Bureau of Investigation had separately investigated potential Ku Klux Klan involvement in at least one of the murders, an investigation that was reportedly sealed and never fully pursued. Those allegations have never been conclusively proven or disproven. One victim's mother, Camille Bell, who had helped force the city to investigate in the first place, later publicly expressed doubt about whether Williams was responsible for her son's death. And in 2019, Atlanta reopened the case, promising modern DNA testing on evidence that had sat in storage for nearly 4 decades. In March 2019, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms announced the case would be reopened. Evidence submitted to a private forensic laboratory in Utah, specialists in decades-old DNA. In July 2021, the city confirmed that DNA had been sampled from 2 cases and sent for advanced analysis. As of the time of this recording, no results have been made public. Wayne Williams, now in his mid-60s, remains in a Georgia state prison. He continues to maintain his innocence. His next parole eligibility is 2027. The families of the victims, those who are still alive, have been waiting for the truth for more than 4 decades. 28, 29, 30 victims. Investigators can't even agree on the exact number. That uncertainty is itself a kind of verdict on how the case was handled. Children went to run errands and never came home. Some were 9 years old. Some were 12. One was 7. Their names were Yusuf and Angel and Darren and Latonia and Alfred and Edward and so many others. More than 4 decades later, Atlanta still remembers their names. And perhaps the greatest mystery isn't who was convicted, but whether every family ever received the truth. Imagine watching your... If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to Mysterious Stories for more true crime, disappearances, and unsolved mysteries. Until our next story, stay safe.